Hi, this is Will Strawn, and you're listening to the Sixth Period Podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Fifth Period, not Sixth Period, as Will's intro would humorously have you believe. Each week on the podcast we talk through a student-selected film. Sometimes we are hooked, and other times the choice is critically panned. My name is Mr. Brown, and with me as always is...
Mr. Whittle. I'm sorry people, I try not to interfere into the intro until it's my turn to talk, but that one was pretty good.
It may be the only thing good in today's podcast.
Something to give away, yes.
We do have a lot to talk about today. We will be doing a student appreciation. We'll be doing our film play-by-play for Hook. We're going to do our weekly watches, and we're also going to do our Tantalising Trailers. So if you would like to skip ahead to anything, I will leave time codes in the description below.
Very good.
Before we fly into our enchanted main feature for the day, just want to thank Will not only for his guest intro, but for this week's film suggestion. Apparently, Hook is amongst his favourites, which was made even more evident as he was wearing the exact same glasses as Robin Williams on Friday.
After my watch of the film, I am a follower of Will on Letterboxd, and I did see that he's got this film at a 5 out of 5. Javier's got it following closely with a 4.5 out of 5.
Javier.
Yes. Yes, the man of many names. So we've got a couple of students in our school who like this film a lot.
Yes. Unfortunately, we didn't have the same level of appreciation for it, but I did still think it was a great choice as a bit of a point of difference from some of the other ones that we have watched. Will is another one of our regulars at Film Club, but I also have the pleasure of teaching him. So very, very talented animator, and I'm super excited about the major project he is working on at the moment. So maybe later in the year, we might be able to do a bit of a showcase of student work as well.
Yeah. Also, I just want to put it out there that I'm thankful that Will put this film forward. It was a bit left of centre in terms of a suggestion, certainly one we didn't watch in Film Club last year. And it was something that, for me, without going into the film just yet, we watched this a lot in the Whittle household as kids. This one did the rounds extensively, but I don't think it's one that I would have revisited since watching it as a child. Getting it suggested was really exciting.
I was definitely the same way. I watched it a lot as a child. I didn't remember having super fond memories of it. Maybe thought it was a little slow when I was a kid. So I was really excited to revisit it as an adult and see how it held up. And yes, we'll get into that in a moment. Before we do jump into talking all things film, two pretty important reminders. Number one is a spoiler warning. I don't think there's any massive plot reveals in this one, but as always, if you don't want anything about the film ruined, make sure you do go ahead and watch it beforehand. The other thing I wanted to mention up top is, please, if you do appreciate the podcast, if you like today's episode, give it a like, subscribe to the channel too, so you can be up to date with new stuff that we are releasing. But more importantly than both of those things, we would love it if people could comment with new suggestions for segments on the show, or even new suggestions for the films of the coming weeks.
Certainly the primary reason we are doing this podcast and running Film Club is because we want to interact and engage with students on their love or hate of cinema. So yeah, the more comments that are around, the more participation, more attendance at Film Club, the better the experience for everyone. So yeah, by all means, please participate.
All right, 1991's Hook, directed by Steven Spielberg. Senor Spielbergo.
Yes. Interesting fact on this one was he picked up this idea for a film. So development of this film was in the early 1980s. So we didn't get the film until 1991, but he had been working on it for about a decade prior, on and off. So he abandoned it for a little while when it hit pre-production because he wasn't a fan of what was currently happening. There was a big script rewrite, and then he came back on board. But Dustin Hoffman, who plays Hook, signed on in the early 80s, waiting for Spielbergo to say, yes, let's go.
He is one of the parts of this film that I think is consistently good.
Hoffman?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, he's great.
I think Hoffman is a standout in this film in terms of whenever he's on screen, he really engages.
I saw just a really brief interview of Steven Spielberg where he's not particularly happy with this film.
No, in multiple interviews, he has said that he is disappointed in this film. He still, however, is happy that he did it because he became really close friends with Robin Williams
that's
through the
nice.
film. So there's a bit of an anecdote where when Robin Williams passed on, he went and watched this film in remembrance, but he couldn't get through it because he was bawling his eyes out through associating with his friendship. So yeah. So he did get something from it, but yes, in terms of a finished product, he was disappointed in it.
Yes, I can...
Understandably so.
Yeah, I
Put
can
it out
see
there,
how he
guys.
thinks he dropped the ball on this one. The baseball, if you will.
Yeah.
So we start off the film at the primary school play, where the teacher is prompting those kids before they even get an opportunity to say their own lines.
Yeah, is this something that happens for dramatic performances?
No. If you are in a play at a school and you've forgotten your line, you're on your own.
Yeah.
Work it out.
Yes.
The fact that they were even performing the story of Peter Pan, the film is filled with, is he real, is he not real, the entire time. There's a lot of inconsistencies with that. As you get further on in the narrative, you do find out that stories have been written based on what Wendy has told about her time in Neverland, and so that's probably what this play is then being based on, but it's very ambiguous.
Going into this film, do you think that you needed to have a basic understanding of the Peter Pan story to really appreciate everything that unfolds? I think you do. I'm a bit disappointed in that the way that the narrative was structured, you have to come in preloaded. You should. I really don't think that's fair on audiences. Like, you should try and make it that you don't need to understand things. And like, you could come into this without having a prior understanding of the Peter Pan story, but for everything that you get from the film, I think you needed to know what Peter Pan was.
Narrative-wise, it helps considerably, but there's also a lot of nods to it, like things that you're supposed to pick up along the way and be like, oh, that's just like in the original Peter Pan.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I've got a few of those as we go through, but I feel like there's a lot of fan service to Peter Pan.
Which can be audience limiting, I think. But, I mean, we see that a lot in movies all the time, I guess now. Talking about the Marvel universe and stuff like that, the Easter eggs that are dropped throughout the whole thing. But I don't know. It stuck in my craw a little bit.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I love when his son is reminding him, oh, don't miss my baseball game. And he's holding the baseball.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you just go see your sister in a play, but you're just holding your baseball, just so your dad remembers you have a baseball game.
But before that even happens, something that really stood out for me is that we're in 1991, people, and we see a mobile phone.
That's true.
We see a pocket mobile phone.
We see an excessive amount of mobile phone in this film.
Yes. I've spoken about it with the Mission Impossible podcast, where technology can certainly time a movie, it can date a film, and this one is no exception. The flip-out Motorola with the antenna pull-out, but I wasn't really aware that it was common for mobiles to be carried around as early as 91, but there you go.
You needed to have them so that you could do a standoff at work where you both whip out your mobile phone as quickly as possible.
This is true, yes.
We get the dad who has to work and might potentially miss his kids' commitments, which was such a staple of these kind of movies. We've brought it up before. I think Mary Poppins probably started the discussion of the absentee father, but we talked about films like The Santa Claus. One that really stood out for me as a comparison was Jingle All the Way, the Arnold Schwarzenegger film.
Yes.
Because when Robin Williams turns up to the baseball field, it's not just that he's missed his son playing, it's completely empty, which is exactly the same thing, almost an identical shot to Jingle All the Way. But yes, then we get the plane trip. There is a Pan Am flight. And just in case you didn't see that it was a Pan Am flight, they hold on that aeroplane for a very, very long period of time. Just like, don't miss the pun.
I did like that bringing in the fear of flying for Peter Banning's character was a kind of fun little character trait to bring in to kind of hint that it is the Peter Pan kind of, the connection was there. So I liked that he had a concern about flying. Yeah.
Peter Banning or Peter Ban for short, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. I like the part where his son gives him the drawing and everyone's got a parachute except him.
I really liked this child actor, the actor that played Jack. I remember liking him as a kid. I just thought he had really good screen presence. And watching this film again, the kid's got charisma in terms of his delivery. Like, he's got sincerity as to being upset at his dad, the way he responds to stuff throughout the film. Yeah, child actors can sometimes be a bit on the nose in terms of, you know, like they're really overt with their delivery. But yeah, I thought...
Well, this film is riddled with overt deliveries from child actors, but Charlie Corsmo is the one you're referring to, and he was great.
Yeah.
He was really, really good.
While we're on the flight, just to call out a little bit of trivia, over the loudspeaker, you hear the pilot say, "This is your captain speaking." Dustin Hoffman delivered that line.
There you go.
How good's that?
That's pretty fun. And there's a few of those things where they bleed the two worlds together.
Yeah.
More obvious ones later on in the film, but there's a couple of things. So the drawing that he gets, even though he doesn't have a parachute in the drawing, I don't know if you notice, the water in it has sharks in it. It doesn't matter if you've got a parachute or not. It's probably not looking good for you.
No, correct.
But the other thing was that in this moment, he repeats to his son, "My word is my bond," after he's just said this to him and then missed the baseball game. I feel like it's a very quick turnaround to try and use this again.
Well, that's why the son doesn't believe him.
This actor too, Charlie Corsmo, have you ever seen the movie What About Bob?
Yes.
With Bill Murray?
Yeah.
He's also the kid in that. So he's got a few credits to his name where he's a disappointed son with an absentee father.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why he was so good in this film. He's had lots of practice playing that role.
Yeah.
We arrive at the house and we get this discussion of Granny Wendy before we see her. So basically, Peter was taken in by Wendy, an older Wendy, because he stayed in Neverland for a little bit longer and then came back to visit Wendy and then married her daughter. Which is just weird, right?
Yeah. So when Wendy explains that to Peter, that's in the bedroom scene. Coincidentally.
Well, but it's weird then too, because she's talking about, and then you fell in love with my daughter, but I've always been really attracted to you.
Yeah.
Like, it's all just, ugh.
Yeah. So everyone wants to kiss Peter.
Oh my God.
Yeah, like it comes up again later on with Tinkerbell, and
Not to mention the three mermaids.
Yes, and the mermaids.
Man,
as well.
this guy gets around.
That's right. Yeah. So everyone wants to give Peter a kiss, and they're not talking about a what's the thumb cover thing?
A thimble?
Thimble. That's the one. That's the word I'm after. Yeah.
One thing I noted, Maggie Smith looks exactly like she does now in this film.
They must have aged her.
Well, of course.
She looks super old in this film, and then 10 years later, she does Harry Potter as an old woman. Yeah.
I said kudos to the makeup artist on being able to predict the future.
Yes.
They got a slightly younger woman and then aged her up because they do have that one scene later on in the film where it's kind of like a flashback of when Peter arrived. So they did want to be able to show her in those two time periods. But the makeup looks incredible.
Yes.
She literally looks exactly like she does now, which is great. We get a lot of symbolism. So as you mentioned on the plane, you've got Dustin Hoffman talking on the loudspeaker. We get the hook latch on the door. We get paintings of the world. And so it does make you think as you're watching it through, well, is it all just in their imagination or are they really going to a world?
I love even with when the windows are open and Peter goes and closes them, then he turns around and puts his hands on
his hips.
Like the hands on his hips is like, it's obviously iconic and symbolic to who he is, but every time he does it, I had a bit of a smile when he does that.
Oh, see, I laughed out loud because I just thought it just looks so unnatural.
It does, but like it's very pointed, right? Like it's like, oh, clearly he's Peter Pan.
Yeah. And as I said, the film is filled with that stuff. In this sequence where he's yelling on the phone, Jack is standing behind him and moves closer to the wall, and so the shadow gets bigger and bigger as he's yelling. Like, the symbolism of that is fantastic, but it's also a nice callback to how much shadow play works in the world of Peter Pan.
Agreed, yeah. Was it just me, or did you too think that maybe Peter's response to his kids at that time was justified because they were being little brats? Like for me, I'm like, he was so apologetic for yelling at them, and I'm like, no, they were being turds. My dad would have yelled at me the same way.
It might have been a step too far. It went from 0 to 100 like that.
But it was quite obviously on an important phone call.
That's true, but they're kids.
Yeah.
It's tough to make Robin Williams unlikable, but they managed to pull it off, especially early on in this film. I don't think this film gives him the opportunity to shine like so many of his other roles do. And
No.
and perhaps that came to the directing, perhaps it was in the script. He just doesn't have that sort of fun Robin Williams feel to him. Even when he does become more childlike towards the end, I thought.
See, I do think the switch when he learns to fly later on and all that stuff, we do get a much more of a Robin that we want in the film. But even with those limitations, and I do agree on the point you're making, I did comment that it reminded me at this point that Robin is a great actor. Like we know that through all his films, and this one was limiting for his range. But it's very rare for me to watch a Robin Williams film and not adore him. It did make me miss him a lot watching this.
Yeah, me too. I must admit though, early on when he's like yelling at the kids, I thought, oh, this is a lot like when he's yelling at the kids in like Jumanji. And as I've said to you before, sometimes when you watch things like this, you go, it makes me want to watch a different film.
Yeah.
So it really made me miss Robin Williams, but not so much for this film.
Did you go to Jumanji? See, for me, I went to Patch Adams in my head. Yeah.
So good.
It made me think about, I want to watch Patch Adams again. Yeah.
He's got so many good ones.
He does.
Even though a lot of my notes for this were frustrating, kind of picking on little aspects of the film, I still think that overall, this is not a bad film. I just don't think it's my kind of film, if that makes sense.
No, I would say that there's some things about this film that the consensus is not one of Spielberg's best.
He says the same.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. Now, the kids go missing.
Yeah, the hook mark on the wall is very sinister. I like the horror kind of aspect. I didn't understand, though, because earlier the baseball goes missing.
So Hook had already come in advance because the girl was saying that weird man.
There was a weird man there. It's like he came, took the baseball, left again, and then he came back and got the kids later.
That is a bit odd.
It is strange.
Yeah.
Did you know that the detective that comes to investigate is Phil Collins?
I did. Well, I knew it when I saw it on the screen. Like, I wouldn't have known it as a kid, but I'm like, oh, I know who that is. And
two major cameos in this film that I picked up, and I think two amongst quite a few.
There are quite a few.
Yeah.
That was one that I picked up. I picked up two more.
Okay.
So I think I know the one that you've picked up. And then the other one was a bit more obscure for, like, if you're not a music fan.
Right.
So we'll get to them as we go along. But yeah, Detective Phil Collins.
Phil Collins. And he says, I think it's just a prank. There are two missing kids and hook marks all over the wall. How is that a prank? Then we are introduced to Tinkerbell. Julia Roberts comes flying in.
Thoughts?
I didn't like that they had pitch adjusted her voice. It was very distracting.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So they're like, well, she's a fairy. She's got to have a slightly higher pitched voice. I don't even know if it's consistent throughout the film. It may only be in her original introduction, or perhaps I just got used to it as it was going on. But it was very, very noticeable when she's first introduced.
Yeah, right. Okay. I didn't notice that. It's probably fed into my general annoyance of that character. I thought it was more Julia Roberts as a bad casting choice. Now that you say that, I'm like, oh, maybe she was hard done by, because I do like her in other films. It's not like I don't like her, but I didn't like her in this film at any stage.
I'm not sure any iteration of Tinkerbell. Now, I haven't seen the sole Tinkerbell film, but most of the time Tinkerbell comes off as annoying, or if she's having a bad day, she'll betray everyone. Like, she's never a overly likable character, and I think she's supposed to be more likable in this, but they just don't give her much to work with. So, as you said, I don't think it's Julia Roberts' fault. I just don't think the scripting around Tinkerbell is very good.
Now, obviously, this is somewhat separate to what's in the scripting, but speaking of likability, supposedly Julia Roberts was really hard to work with on set. She had the nickname of Tinker Hell.
Is that right?
Yeah. Subsequent interviews, she was able to rationalise why she was maybe a bit challenging to work with, because she had to do a lot of green screen and solitude work.
Would she even have been on set with people if she's doing that?
Obviously not cast so much as crew, but yeah.
I see, right.
Yeah.
No green dress, no blonde hair, which I appreciated that they were trying to go for something different, but I actually think the film could have benefited from more of this. So I like the idea of there's this legend of Peter Pan, and then there's the world that they go into. And I wished that the legend was kind of like a fantastical, whimsical version of a darker world.
Yeah.
I think that would have been cool, but for the most part, it's like, no, we're going exactly what the narrative of Peter Pan is, but every now and then we'll just change this or this. And I'm like, you probably could have done that a little bit more, I thought.
I did generally think that the effects looked cheap as well.
At times, for sure. The green screen stuff was a big miss, but I liked that sometimes they went for the more practical effects, like they would build bigger sets to make it look like she was actually within like the dollhouse.
Yes. Yeah.
The stuff like that landed a little better.
But as we've talked about in previous podcasts, like practical effects work because they aren't dependent on technology limitations so much. So, absolutely agree with you around the practical effects and general production design, really strong.
Which we see in the very next scene when we got all of
Neverland.
these great ships and things like that's very cool.
Yeah, I loved it as well. When we entered into Neverland, Peter gets dropped off by Tinkerbell. He wakes up and then he's in this world of the pirates and the singing and the costume and Spielberg uses a bunch of wides to really show us the world. And it pays off. Like, it looks fantastic.
Yeah, and as soon as we get into this sequence, I'm like, okay, here we go. I'm ready now. And they even do this great thing where he has to pretend to be a pirate, and Tinkerbell's giving him instructions on how he should walk. And I was like, yes, finally some, like, physical comedy to go with Robin Williams' skill.
Yeah.
But it's only a very limited moment, and then I feel like he retreats back into his character that he was before. So... Look, there are some really great things about this film, but I feel like every time I got excited about something, that excitement didn't last very long.
Yeah, they didn't build on it.
Exactly right, yeah.
For sure. It was in spits and spurts. One for me is Bob Hoskins' entrance as Smee.
I didn't even recognize him then. It took me until the end of the film where he's just like in the yard out the front of the house to be like, oh my God, that's Bob Hoskins.
Oh, really?
I didn't recognize him as a pirate.
So the whole movie you didn't know was Bob?
No idea.
Right.
But
Awesome.
great for our 6 degrees of separation.
Well, it very easily ties into Roger Rabbit, for sure. I knew the cast, so I knew where he was, even if... So I wonder whether I would have not recognised him if I didn't pre-look at the cast list as well. But, as Smee, introducing Hook, who, like you and I have already said, Dustin Hoffman as Hook, I think, steals every scene.
Because he's having a ball, right? He just looks like he's having so much fun with the character.
He's got a bit of prosthetics onto the nose and the teeth as well, but he's also putting on the accent. Like, he does not sound like any generic version of Dustin Hoffman from any other film, and I just love it.
Later on, he's laughing and he's like, ha ha, good form. Like, just the pompous kind of voice behind it. It works really well because everyone else is doing like your classic cliche pirate voices, and he's got more of like it's almost like he's a little more refined.
Yes.
I love the way he plays it. It's so good.
So we meet him. He is obviously coming across as a sinister individual, an antagonist. Smee roll out the red carpet. Smee, where's my hook? I love the dynamic between the two of them as well. I think that they're both great casting choices, and whenever they're in the scene, they own the scene.
They have good kind of play back and forth off each other.
Yeah. We see Hook accused, like we learn how evil Hook is through his approach to one of his fellow pirates and accuse them of betting against him winning. Yeah. Now, that was a well-known actor.
That was the one I recognized.
So you recognized her?
Yeah.
I did not recognize her.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so when I went after the film and looked at the cast list, I'm like, who was this? Gutless was the name of the character.
Yeah, I was like, Glenn Close, what are you doing in my Peter Pan movie?
Did not pick up that it was Glenn Close.
Yeah, Glenn Close, but no cigar.
So Glenn got put in the boo box with the scorpions.
Yeah, but just so random. Such a famous actor for just that very brief moment.
Very odd, yeah.
Does she have like a good relationship with Steven Spielberg? Is it just him getting a bunch of people he likes in the film?
So there's a couple of other things that happen that I did not pick up as I watched. It's only after, and I've picked out the IMDb trivia. The scene where the couple gets sprinkled with fairy dust is Carrie Fisher and George Lucas kissing.
No way.
100%. Carrie Fisher actually came on.
There's not even a close. It's like an extreme long shot.
Carrie Fisher actually came onto this film to do writing, which I didn't know she did much writing, but she came in and wrote parts of to refine Tinkerbell as a character. Yeah.
Well, that didn't work.
Obviously,
out
we
too well.
know George Lucas and Spielberg work closely together. But yeah, so they're all kind of in on it together. Yeah. So that was an odd one. I didn't know about that one.
So this was around about when Hook's first introduced. I was excited, but I was also at a point where I was already feeling like I want to check my watch.
This is when I started doing that.
And I noted a movie called Hook takes 40 minutes to officially hook.
Yeah.
He's the best part of it, and they could have gotten to him way quicker.
Yeah, I mean, this film is long. You and I called that out prior to pressing play on it, that for a film that's primarily targeted at kids, it goes into 2 hours, 20 minutes, which is a bit of a slog. Like, now, I never remember it feeling like one as a kid, so maybe I'm just being more picky on about it now, but yeah, so 40 minutes in would be somewhat into the first quarter done, but they really did leave it quite a while, and how much of that world building prior needed to occur, yeah, it did take a while, I agree.
Yeah, and it is a kids' film, but there are times where it definitely doesn't feel like a kids' film. There's a lot of kids-style humor, like pants falling down and things like that. The jokes for me, they never land. See what I did there? But I just feel like even though some of the humor seems very obviously aimed at kids, there's a lot of themes and things that come up that you go, well, kids wouldn't respond to this at all. Or even the pacing of the film doesn't feel like that's for kids either. And I don't think it's a case of we're making a kids film, but we're throwing in enough elements for adults, because they don't usually do that in that way, where they take on quite serious themes and they're like, well, this is for the adults and this is for the kids. Usually it's mainly for the kids, but we'll throw in a couple of jokes that only adults will get.
What would be an example for you?
The absentee father, and they present it in a darker way in this film than they usually would.
Yeah.
But there's also the complexity of love and how all of these different people can love this one person. That's not something that kids will appreciate.
For me, upon finishing the film and thinking about it all, I lacked connection with this film. Like, I just did not connect with it as an adult, but I do strongly remember loving it as a kid. Now, I know there's plenty of older viewers who adore this film as well, so maybe there's something to be said about that. But when we go back to films that we enjoyed as kids, usually as adults we can find a new in or a separate in. For this one, I just couldn't.
Yeah.
Now, you kind of did say that as well, like maybe they had intentions, but it just didn't land.
Possibly.
Neverlands?
Yeah. Stole my joke.
Yeah, that's right.
He gets thrown off the plank, doesn't walk the plank, he backflips off the plank.
He goes down and makes out with some mermaids.
Clearly in a swimming pool too, though.
Yes.
It's not an ocean. Like, I can see the back of the swimming pool when he's in there.
So this film was pretty much entirely done at sound stages in Hollywood studios, which maybe is part of why Spielberg isn't a fan of it. Like, the authenticity is not there as much because it's quite clearly in a swimming pool. Yeah. I did notice it as well.
Yeah.
It looks cheap.
But you're right, he makes out with 3 mermaids. I think this is the first time he cheats on his wife.
Yes.
Or first, second, and third time he cheats on his wife.
Yeah.
But it comes back again later on in the film. When he arrives at the Lost Boys camp, Tinkerbell's just having a snooze.
Yeah, so she had already given up on him?
Well, it happens pretty much straight after the last scene where she was on the boat.
Was it meant to be a time jump? That one really threw me.
It was very strange. She was sleeping soundly. She didn't care that he died. She'd just given up on the mission and everything as well. It was just like, oh, well, I'll just go to bed.
But who pulls in Peter from the water then?
It's very unclear because none of the Lost Boys are awake yet.
Yeah.
She wakes them up afterwards. It's all very strange.
Yeah.
Maybe the mermaids did it.
Yeah, but that sequence didn't fly with me.
The Lost Boy so they're all introduced and we get one that's like combing his hair like a greaser.
Yes.
And I made note that this was the character that Spielberg really wanted to make a film about. And it took him 30 years to bring out his version of West Side Story just so that this character could shine. Why do they put extra padding on Robin Williams' stomach in this film?
So they can sing the song about him being fat later on.
It doesn't make any sense because his weight is not the issue. That's not what he needs to change. He needs to change his personality. And then they do this big training montage where they're just working on him physically. And half a day later, we see him without a shirt and he doesn't have padding anymore.
Not only does he not have padding, he also doesn't have hair.
Yeah.
So he actually got shaved for this movie. Anyone who knows Williams knows he's a hairy boy.
Oh, he's a hairy boy.
He's a hairy boy.
Yeah. So why did he get shaved?
I don't know.
To bring back that boyish Peter Pan charm.
Yes, that's right.
But yeah, I just thought it was an odd choice to put him in padding to begin with. It's just such an irrelevant point of the story.
Yeah,
it's about how he lost his childhood, not how he lost his figure.
Yeah.
They're very primitive, the Lost Boys, going around on their skateboards.
Yes. I mean, it's quite a mishmash of a gang that we experience, which I kind of like. There's something fun about what the Lost Boys represent, and there are some very cute, likable characters.
Some are likable. I thought quite a lot of them were irritating.
Who didn't you like?
Nobody more than Rufio. He took the cake for being annoying as hell for me.
I love Rufio.
I don't understand the appeal at all. I know everyone loves Rufio.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks Rufio gets a raw deal in this film, but I didn't like him. He was very annoying. All things that they're trying to do. He's a child, so he becomes very childish in response to Robin Williams, but I just found that super annoying.
What about Thudbutt? What were your thoughts on Thudbutt?
Which one's Thudbutt?
He's the kid who gives the marbles for Tiddles, who ends up getting the sword at the end. He's going to lead.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're jumping ahead here, but did he do anything throughout the film that stood out to you as he should be the next leader?
No.
Was his ability to fold his limbs in on himself and then roll down into pirates?
Well, that's what we have to do commonly when we go
When
to
we're leaders,
as an interview for a leadership role.
Oh, dear. But yeah, he was all right. He was good.
Yeah.
I liked him as a character. We cut back to Hook, and he's not wearing his hat anymore. He has just the most amazing hair, doesn't he? Well, wig, but it's amazing.
Yeah, Hook's costume, or like within the film overall, is just really dominant whenever he's around. Like, I love everything about the Hook look. Yeah.
The Hook look, yeah, that's good. Pirate chic. I like how he taunts the kids. He's very manipulative in being like, your dad doesn't love you.
See, I labeled this as probably one of my favorite scenes because I think we see Dustin Hoffman doing his best work in the film in his manipulation of the kids. And like I pointed out earlier, especially the actor who plays Jack, but also the sister as well. I forget her character name, but they're both really good actors, and their response and their succumbing to Hook's manipulation is really authentic.
Yeah, oh, for sure. But as soon as you said you really liked Jack, I thought of how he does change over the film and how it was believable that he would sort of switch sides because he'd been left down by his dad.
Yeah.
That was very cool. The imaginary food scene?
Yeah, odd. And
Odd, for sure.
I remember loving it as a kid. It's like, oh, this is kind of cool because then when Peter starts believing, you see the colourful mashed potato or whatever hit the face of Rufio. Is it Rufio?
It doesn't look very appealing though, hey?
No, far from appealing. Like, and you know, if these kids are all seeing it and Peter's not, and then we finally see it as the audience as well, it's like these kids were very excited about just some highly coloured mash.
Although this scene does have my favourite line in the film, where Robin Williams says, "Gandhi ate more than this."
Yes.
And I was like, there you are, Robin Williams. That's got to be an improv line.
There was like two or
in the
three
mix.
lines in the film, like when he first meets the Lost Boys, he says, "What is this, a Lord of the Flies dress rehearsal?"
That's
something
great.
like that.
That's very good.
There are just like morsels of Robin work in the film as
where
well.
you're kind of like, it doesn't really match your character, but I just love hearing it.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
Rufio gets into the fight with Peter, and they're saying they're rhyming insults back at each other. Peter says, "In your ear, cow derriere." That doesn't rhyme. But that's like one of the ones where the boys are like, "Whoa!" and he wins. But yeah, I think it's stuff like that where it's like, it's clearly aimed at kids. And so when I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, this scene isn't for me.
No.
Like, yeah. And so it's fine because I know it's not for me. But there's a lot of people who enjoyed it as kids, but then due to that nostalgia, still really enjoy it as an adult. And maybe it didn't have a big enough impact on me as a child for me to still be appreciating now.
Yeah, maybe it's that. I mean, for me, that one is a great example of, like, I loved that scene as a kid and just did not connect with it this time around. So even there's people that will hold on to the love from when they watch it as a child and go, well, no, it still stands up. And they can't be as critical on it. Where for me, I'm like, yeah, no, that's for 6-year-old Matt, but not for current one.
It was when they're all chanting Peter's name and Rufio starts chanting his own name that I was like, how can anyone like this guy? What a loser. At this point, we cut back to Hook, and he has kind of turned Jack against his father, and we get like the baseball sequence.
Yep.
And there was a couple things from this scene that I made note of. Number one, I mean, there's obviously some examples of the pirates being bad, like shooting people or manipulating the kids or whatever. But in this sequence, I was like, it's hard to tell the difference between the two groups. One, when Peter arrives with the Lost Boys, they like torture him and try and attack him. And now we got pirates who are supporting Jack through playing baseball. So it's hard to pick which group is better at times throughout the film. And I like that aspect of it because it gives kind of the world more complexity. At times it's a very two-dimensional, this guy's good, this guy's bad. But then at other times you're like, well, there's variations of good and bad. And I think genuinely it's not just about revenge. At times in the film, Hook does connect with Jack, and he does genuinely look at him as kind of like a son.
Yeah, yep.
Which I thought was pretty cool. But the other thing that I mentioned in here, because this is following the scene where Peter has had the imagination to be able to see the food, he's now more childlike.
Yes.
And he's acting really goofy, and it hammers home the point of being a child so much when we get this pettiness of him not really caring too much about his son until someone else wants him.
Oh,
and then he's like, no, my Jack.
Yeah.
He literally says that line, and I'm like, you petty child.
Mm-hmm. It was around this time where we have the clock smashing scene as well. I think it was actually before the game, the baseball game, where Hook takes Jack into the room full of clocks.
Oh, yes.
And that one, I think, is quite an important scene because it really creates the reflection that the literal reflection that when Jack was looking in the clocks before he smashed them, and you see his emotion around how he's feeling towards his father. That really locked it in for me that the actor playing Jack is really strong. Yeah.
And I like the metaphor of the clocks too. They always have it as if Hook doesn't like the sound of it ticking. But it's also the idea that in Neverland time doesn't pass. And so time as a concept in general within this world is completely dismissed.
Yeah, they fear it. They fear time because it means growing old. It means moving on. Even Hook is fearful of it. Like, he is surprised when Peter comes back old because he was of the mind that Peter would do the same thing he's done, which is stay stuck in time. Yeah.
Then we get the scene where Tinkerbell dresses up for Peter. Yet another point where I noted how odd the romances in the film are. We got his wife Moira, we got old Wendy, we've got Tinkerbell, and then we got the 3 mermaids. And all of them like Peter, but they like Peter at different ages.
Yeah.
Tinkerbell's still a kid because she liked Peter when Peter was a kid. But now she's kissing old Robin Williams. It's all weird.
Now, I think the intent is that Peter is meant to represent something. So it's not so much about liking Peter as a person, more as what he represents, which is youthfulness and lovability of humankind, these kinds of things. But I don't think the film conveys that effectively. I know that more from preceding understanding of the Peter Pan character from other work. So I don't think the intent of, they all love Peter because Peter represents something, subliminally beautiful. They don't get that across.
No.
Yeah.
And that comes back to the fact, it comes back to 2 things. Number one, you said you only know it because of your understanding of the narrative outside of this film, which, again, you don't want to have to do research before you go into a film.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, this is one of the points that I was saying about that's a theme that only adults could really get. And it's been inserted into this primarily kids' film.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just think there's inconsistencies with what the film is trying to do.
Agreed.
He finally gets his ability to fly back, and he does so by thinking of Jack. He needed a happy thought in order to fly.
This scene conflicts me because I found it to be victorious fun, like that Peter finally thought up his happy thought, and him flying through the air is great, but this scene, actually, no, it happened earlier on. It happened very early on. I got annoyed by this film because John Williams' soundtrack. All right?
Block your ears, Riley.
It actually happened at the baseball scene, like the first one where Peter misses the game. The music, not only was it doing that classic Williams thing of just being everywhere all the time, and so really kind of in your face, metaphorically speaking, part of your face at least, your ears. It wasn't even suitable to the scene's tone in that scene and a few other scenes as well. So I know Spielberg has an absolute love for getting Williams on board for pretty much everything he's done. I love Spielberg films. I don't like Williams soundtracks. And this one, Peter flying through the air, reminded me of that as well. Like, you know, the music was tonally correct, but it was just so in your face.
I do agree, though, the victory of this scene is very cool.
Yeah.
I thought the flying effects were actually pretty cool, too.
Yep.
There are some effects in the film that are a little bit janky. I think the flying kind of holds up for the most part. What I didn't think was a good choice was that Jack is the reason that he can fly again. And then as a result of that, he forgets all about Jack. So it's like, Jack is my favorite thing in the world, so that's going to make me happy. Now I can fly. And who's Jack? I don't remember my family at all. It doesn't really make much sense. But there's a lot of that. Later on in the film, he comes in on the boat, and Jack even says to Captain Hook, he goes, "Who's that?" It's like, "That's your dad." There's so much of this, we're going to forget people in an instant. The whole idea of Peter Pan in general is that it's this magical world, and then when you return from it, over time, you start to rationalize things and forget that you ever went to this place. But in this film, it would have you believe that you're forgetting things in a heartbeat.
Yes. And also when you've returned to the magical place as opposed to stepping away from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all a little inconsistent.
I was going to throw in a code word at this point.
Please.
Bangarang.
Bangarang.
Yes.
Yeah. I feel like I've heard Bangarang be used a lot, and I don't really know its origin.
I assume it's got premise within the Peter Pan lore, because I know it as well. I've heard it in a song by a band called Mr. Bungle. No one will know what I'm referring to there. It's something that does the rounds for sure. Yeah.
So we get the big sword fight. Amazing how the pirates who had guns earlier in the film decide not to use any of them within this fight sequence. The slowest sword fighting choreography in the world. It is just very boring.
Is this before he calls on the Lost Boys to come and help him? Because when the Lost Boys come in, I had a little bit of fun with that.
The Lost Boys fighting is great.
Yeah.
But just this particular sword fight between Peter and one of the pirates on the upper deck when he goes to save his daughter.
Yeah.
It's so slow. It's very much like when people are play fighting and they purposely go to hit each other as opposed to trying to injure the other person.
Now, I think it was at this point in the film that the cameo that I noticed that was a real deep cut comes up again. He's one of the pirates. It was David Crosby, who is from the band Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Oh, okay.
I when I first saw him, I'm like, I think that's David Crosby. And then I'm like, no, surely not. And then, because you have to go right to the end of the IMDb credits to find these cameos.
Right.
Now, there's another one that I picked up, which was, I think, before this scene, where we have the Tinkerbell and Peter's backstory and the whole young Wendy to old Wendy. Did you notice who was playing one of the young Wendy's? This was the one I thought.
Gwyneth Paltrow?
Gwyneth Paltrow.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yes. I'd forgotten all about
her second ever film, she is the goddaughter of Steven Spielberg.
There you go.
When I saw her, I'm like, that could only be one person, even as a young person. She's got a very particular face. So Gwyneth was there as well.
That's fun. You were saying Crosby, Stills and Nash was a deep cut, and I feel like this is the perfect time to bring up a deep cut because this is where Rufio meets his doom.
Rufio's death. Everyone's got a bit of a soft spot for this one.
Not me.
Not you.
No,
Yeah.
I thought it was probably just karma for saying, looky, looky, I got hooky. No one can say a line that lame and get away with it, right?
I love that line. I love Rufio. Like, even though I'm now going back to this film going, so, I still loved Rufio going back.
You know what I think? I think because I didn't enjoy the film, as we're going through it, I'm taking such a hard stance on it that you're starting to have more of a fondness for it than you thought.
Oh, well, I think we established that up top that, like, as children experiencing the film, we went to it time and time again in the Whittle household, whereas you said that it wasn't one that really stood out.
No.
Yeah, so there is that affection for it as a premise for coming back to it now. But I still 100% stand by the fact that I don't overly enjoy it as an adult now.
And look, I must say too that my perception of it was probably a little skewed too, because when it was suggested, I actually was quite excited to return to it because I thought I would have more fondness for it. So when I didn't, I almost felt more annoyed because I'd set it up in my head to be better than it turned out to be.
Yeah. Like, the film does wrap up kind of quickly.
It does. When he's leaving, did you like the whisper? Thank you for believing, as he flies away. That might have been my favourite part of the entire film.
Sincerely.
No.
Oh.
It was so cheesy. So stupid.
I think they saved the cheesy for the very, very last line where Toodles is off in the air and Peter delivers his... What's that line about? Life is the best gift of all or something like that.
I don't know. I've repressed it since last night. You're right. It does wrap up quickly. There's some odd things that happen when they get back to the house. So first of all, the mum, worried sick. I think Moira's her name.
Yep.
Worried sick that the kids have been missing all night. The kids come back and they decide, we'll just jump into bed. We won't tell her we're back. We'll let her worry for a little bit longer and then we'll jump out.
Surprise, Mum, we're here.
Yeah. But I also don't get why they do the whole, it was a dream thing with Robin Williams sitting outside. It's clearly not a dream at this point.
No.
We're aware that it's happened. So why are they doing the, that old, and you were there? And you were there. It's like the Wizard of Oz. Everything that was in the world is actually around me and maybe it didn't happen and it was a dream. But it's not. It happened.
I was just thrown at that whole last sequence because the sheepdog's name is Nana.
That bothers you?
Yeah.
It was Nana in the original Peter Pan.
I just don't understand why you'd name a dog Nana. But anyway.
He finishes by showing how much he's changed by telling Jack to always leave the window open, just so that if someone tries to abduct him again, they'll be able to get in with greater ease.
Quality parenting, Robin.
Alrighty. I think we've made our opinions on the film very clear. I certainly have made my opinion on it. But I do want to reiterate that it didn't work for me. I don't think the film falls completely flat across the board. I think there are some great sequences that for a very particular audience, this film could be very well received, and it is very well received by a lot of people. So it just wasn't my film this week.
Yeah, agreed. It's... As I've made mention, I do think it's very much for an audience of children, and that transfer to an adult audience isn't quite there for it. I always look at these films that I think aren't the best and go, well, what would I have done better? And that's a hard thing to do because without really breaking apart the production and going, okay, maybe I would have tightened up this aspect of the script, you'd have to really pick it apart. But for me, it certainly could have done with a bit more tightening up of the overall appeal of the characters, namely Peter, in the scripting.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. He's the lead character, and I just don't think he's particularly likable in his adult form or his child form. He just feels like a very selfish character throughout the film. Should we move on to our weekly watches?
Let's.
How many? You've got a lot this week, don't you?
I have a lot. I don't have as many as I did last time, but I have thought that maybe I will just give a wrap that isn't all 8. Whenever I'm done a bumper week like this, I'll just pick out the ones that I think are good highlights to share with our audience.
And when you say a wrap, you mean you will actually gangster rap, these films and the synopsis behind them?
No.
Oh. Colour me disappointed.
So I'll start with the first one I watched was Renfield. So Nicolas Cage playing Dracula and Nicholas Hoult. So it's a nick off.
It is a nick off.
Not the first time these two have been in a film together. I did not know this. I don't think you'll pick it up either.
No.
He plays Nicolas Cage's son in The Family Man.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry, is it The Family Man or the Weatherman?
The Family Man is the Christmas movie where he imagines
Tia
Leone.
Leone, yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so very young Nicholas Hoult plays his son in that film.
Yeah.
But this one came out just last year. No, this year, sorry. It only came out a few weeks ago. Lot of fun. Don't go in expecting anything of depth. If you go in expecting a funny, fun, comical, colourful romp of a film where it's got quite a bit of gore in it, but it's done in a Evil Dead-ish kind of manner.
Sounds perfect.
I had a lot of fun with this one, and it's a tight 90, so that's always a win. Awkwafina is Nicholas Holt's love interest in the film.
That's fun.
And she's really good.
She's great in everything,
Yeah, she's I really like her. I had a lot of fun with that one, Renfield.
I'm very excited to see that one myself. I continued, or not even continued, I finished my journey into the DCU. All three of my films today are DC films. I started with Aquaman, which was very, very well received by audiences. I think it's ranked as one of the best of the DCEU.
Oh, right.
And I just found it boring. I can see that it doesn't have a lot of the plot holes and stupidity of a lot of the other DC films. So it's lacking a lot of its flaws, but for me, it just was not a narrative that I responded to. Having it set underwater the entire time, I found that really hard to connect with the characters.
Did it need more mermaids kissing the main character?
Possibly, quite possibly. Yeah. The characters were a bit cheesy. All the dialogue is super exaggerated, and the CGI is subpar at best. Again, I don't think that it's a bad film, but I found it to be quite slow and boring, and it's quite a long film. So as someone who's been really enjoying watching some of these films that are terrible because I like to poke fun at that aspect, this one wasn't terrible, but it was just a bit of a snooze fest for me.
Next one for me was in anticipation of Denis Villeneuve's masterpiece that's coming out later this year, which we'll talk about in a bit because that's a tantalising trailer. I went back to his back catalogue and decided I'm going to work through it. I started off with his Hollywood films rather than, because he did quite a few films, I think 3 or 4 prior to coming over to Hollywood, but his first Hollywood venture was a film called Prisoners, which was Hugh Jackman and Jake Gyllenhaal. Exceptional film.
Amazing. So good.
Such Paul Dano as well, playing like not dissimilar a role to what he plays in The Batman in terms of his creepiness and like it's kind of like a sizzle reel for what he'd do in The Batman in many ways. But I'm always a fan of ranking directors' work. Something like Denis Villeneuve, who has such a great range. This one, I feel on the rewatch would push up into the, I don't know what it would take a place from because he's got such great films across the board. But yeah, expect me to talk about a few more of his films over the upcoming weeks. But that one was fun. Well, I think fun's the wrong word for that particular film, but I really enjoyed watching it. Prisoners.
Next on my list is Justice League, the Snyder Cut. So, after talking about Justice League last week, I finally got around to watching the Snyder Cut. And I'll tell you, I was actually pretty excited to go into this one. Because I was so disappointed with how the canon version of the film went and how underdeveloped all the characters were and the hype that had surrounded the Snyder Cut, I was very, very excited to go into it. It's a long film, but I would say out of all of the DCU films that I have been watching, this one I was pretty into. Like, I was really engaged. It is certainly not a flawless film. An hour could be trimmed out of it, but it was just such a step up from the Joss Whedon version that I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And it was nice too, knowing the backstory of how all of the actors felt about the Joss Whedon cut and how they were overworked. It was a really nice kind of story of them coming back together to make the film that they all originally wanted to make, working with people that they felt they were treated with respect. And yeah, it was cool just seeing a film that the cast, the crew, they were all really, really proud of, which was nice. And I thought it was good. I think it really holds up compared to some of the other ones.
Nice. Next one for me was a very old film compared to what we commonly talk about. 1956 film called Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
So good.
So I rewatched the more modern-ish one, the 70s one with featuring Donald Sutherland a couple of months ago, and really enjoyed that.
I do think that's the best iteration of it.
Yeah, I think I like that one more. But this one, and I was talking to you about this film earlier this week, I don't commonly look to the golden age of cinema with fondness. I'm very much into my modern cinema. And when I say modern, anything kind of mid-60s onwards is really going to be more my jam. But this one was really strong. Cinematography's great. Soundtrack's great. The use of practical effects to represent the monsters in it are really good. And the whole thematic idea of mass hysteria and then conformity is really well told. Yeah, the film, and it's only like 77 minutes long. Really engaging film throughout. So for a black and white 1956 film, I had a blast.
You can see why it's been remade so many times.
Yes.
Because the narrative is really strong.
Yeah, agreed.
And the idea of paranoia, like who can you trust, who can't you? Like, I think that's really good. And there is a lot that can be developed in that story in terms of like, it's not just about, oh, well, our special effects are a little bit better now. There's story elements and plot beats that really do get a full rework in each of the iterations that come afterwards. So they are all interesting, but yeah, the 70s version is the one that I always remember as being really impactful.
If nothing else, for having a man's face on a dog.
Exactly right, yeah.
Yeah.
And that'll stay with you. My last film for my weekly watches is Wonder Woman 1984. And I should say that with the exception of, I don't even know what the character is, whatever The Rock's character is, insert title
Can't they just
here.
call him The Rock in every film as his character name as well?
He is that, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Is it like Black Bolt? No, it isn't. I don't know. Whatever he's...
Black Adam?
Black Adam, thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Look at you.
Yeah, I know, right?
I'm very
proud
proud.
of myself.
Very proud.
Yeah.
With the exception of that film, I have now completely finished off this universe. So I know you're getting very sick of me talking about these films. I was getting very sick of watching them by the end. But Wonder Woman 1984, I watched this just last night, and it is, as people had warned me, it is just a mess of a film. So it's set in the 80s. Probably couldn't predict that from the title. When it started, I thought, I can see why people don't like this film because it's got a very 80s kind of cheesy superhero style to it. Like, all the bad guys are really ridiculous and over the top in this opening sequence that happens in a mall, the Stranger Things mall, which we've brought up quite a lot lately. And I thought, I understand why people don't like it. It's a tonal shift, but it's set in the 80s. This kind of works for an 80s superhero film. But I was wrong. That is not why people don't like it. As the film went on, there was just one problem after the next in terms of character development, shoehorning in plot points. I feel like it was when the invisible jet made an appearance that was clearly just for fan service. They just make Diana, they give her the ability to turn anything invisible and she chooses to use it on a jet. It was just so stupid. The jet disappears, but all of a sudden they can't hear the jet anymore. They can no longer see it on any of their equipment that picks up like the radar detection, any of that stuff. Didn't make any sense. So yeah, that's just not how invisibility works.
Tell me, how does invisibility work?
Well,
Mr. Brown.
things disappear, but you can still hear them, right?
Okay.
And you would still be able to pick them up with your
Well, I guess
technical equipment.
through the term alone, invisible doesn't mean inaudible.
Exactly
Yeah,
right.
there you go. Well done.
And this was just me picking out one specific moment and explaining it to you because the whole film is just this kind of stuff throughout it.
Yep.
they decide to fly straight through a bunch of fireworks for no reason other than it'll be beautiful to have those fireworks around them. Mm-hmm. That's super. Why would you do that? That's an unnecessary risk that you're putting that jet through. Anyway, that's so stupid. The film, as someone who really liked the first Wonder Woman, I thought, I'm really hoping that some people don't like this, but I'll really respond to it. But no, it was an absolute disaster. So I'm happy to be out the other side of the this set of films. I have no intention of seeing Black Adam. I was only doing these ones in the lead up to the new Flash, and I think I've now seen all of the films that I need to in order to appreciate that.
You don't need to see all of them. You just need to see ones that lead up in the story.
And I'm sure there's ones that I did watch that I didn't need to see as well, but I wasn't 100% sure.
Do you know Black Adam is one that you don't need to watch?
I feel like if they make a Black Adam reference, I don't care.
Because they should be saying The Rock anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Final film for me was the fourth installment in the Mission Impossible series.
Ooh, baby.
Mr. Brown and I have found a new connection point around talking about these films. In case you're unaware from previous podcasts, Mr. Brown is a massive fan of these films. I have been a fan of them as well, but I'm going back to them. I haven't seen them as much as you have. And I had seen this one as well, so I feel like I'd seen 1 to 4 before. I think I may have even seen the 5th one, but I definitely haven't seen the 6th one. This one was so much fun. I don't know where I sit with it ranked out of the first 4 because for different reasons I adored it. Like for me, it was the 3 main locations they chose: Kremlin in Russia, Abu Dhabi, and then India. They utilized those locations so well, and the action scenes that occur across those 3 locations, some of the best that have occurred within the first 4 films. I also liked that Ethan Hunt's character goes back to just being focused on achieving the mission. He's not driven by an emotional plot point. He also doesn't do any shooting. Like, there's just certain things that I want him as a character to be, and this one really delivered for me. More reliance on Benji as a character as well. Jeremy Renner's, is that the actor's name? Mm-hmm. Yeah. His inclusion into the film at this point was good.
I remember when we were doing our Mission Impossible podcast, I mentioned to you that the intention was that Jeremy Renner would sort of pick up the mantle of the lead agent.
I had remembered that as I watched this film, watching them set up this character, like with that intent in place for this one. But I love this film. I am very excited to watch 5 and 6 now. Like, I have been trying to space them out, so I did wait 2 weeks between 3 and 4.
You can't wait too long because then the new one will be out.
The new one is coming in 2 months now. I think July it hits sometime. So yeah, I am going to get to the other 2 over the upcoming weeks. Also, I know that they're sitting there and I'm just really excited to watch them. So when I have to watch a film like Hook versus when I want to watch a film like Mission Impossible, yeah, they're sitting there waiting.
Have to. Yeah. Just one more time to take a dig at Hook.
Yes.
Alrighty, let us move on to our tantalizing trailers. First on my list is Oppenheimer. Do you see there's a new trailer for it?
No, I haven't watched the new trailer. I watched the teaser trailer that came out a few months ago. That's all I've seen.
Well, I won't give too much away then, but I will say that you and I were discussing this the other day, and I was saying the teaser trailer didn't really grab me, but this one drew me in a lot more. So I may potentially see this at the movies. I'm a big Christopher Nolan fan. I don't think all of his films are flawless. Tenet didn't really work for me, but this one's looking good.
Did you like Dunkirk?
I did. I really liked Dunkirk.
Yeah.
I saw that quite late.
Yeah.
I didn't see it when it first came out. I'm not a huge war epic kind of person.
Neither am I normally, but Dunkirk I loved a lot.
I agree wholeheartedly.
This one is like, because he's obviously looking at a historical event and wanting to represent it. So this one has notes of Dunkirk for me in terms of Nolan's approach.
Yeah, for sure. I'm wondering what the big twist or the big, like, there's always something on top of, even if it's like trying to be historically accurate, I feel this film is still presenting some sort of surprise within it that we don't necessarily know. I'm not suggesting that there'll be worlds within worlds or that time will go backwards or anything like that, but I think that he will add some sort of a spin to the traditional narrative.
Well, with Dunkirk, it was about representing the stories with an overlap.
Exactly right,
so
yeah.
There wasn't anything that he didn't revise the historical element of it in any way. but it was the structure that he chose to kind of put a bit of intrigue in with it. Yeah. I only had one tantalising trailer this week, which was the upcoming second part to June. So,
boy, I'm excited now.
Have you seen the first one, Mr. Brown?
I tried multiple times.
We're obviously being facetious here. Mr. Brown has made it apparent to me and whoever else will listen that June just wasn't his jam.
Whoever else will listen, you make it sound like I go to street corners.
No, but that's
preach
true.
about it.
In terms of people who asked what your thoughts were on it, you endeavoured to sit through it twice over and
3 times and fell asleep all 3 times. I'm consistent.
Blows my mind because for me, the first one was amazing. I saw it twice at the cinemas. Have watched it at home since as well. I love everything Denis Villeneuve does. He has a very particular look to his films and an approach to story that it's kind of got a Fincher cold harshness to it, but it's not quite so void of any kind of warmth. He balances it better, and I felt like the first Dune did that. The world was just epic, and there's kind of a quasi-realism to it, even though it's very much a fantasy film. And the trailer for part 2, which I believe has now been pushed back to a November release. So they looked at the American summer blockbusters and go, no, we want this one to make money. We'll wait a little while longer, because I think it was originally slated for July. Very, very excited for the second part.
Yes. My other tantalising trailers are all teaser trailers. I'm going to kind of roll them into one because they're all things that I've kind of mentioned in passing before. So we've got a new teaser for The Flash, a new teaser for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, and a teaser for Aquaman 2. Now, it's interesting too because whenever you see these teasers, especially if a big trailer has already been released, you question, are these legitimate trailers? Has somebody found a couple of extra clips and they've just kind of merged them together with a voiceover or whatever it might be? But for me, especially for Mission Impossible, anytime I see new footage for that, I'm like, I got to watch that. I'm so geared up for it. It just keeps me going that little bit longer. I have mentioned previously that I am quite excited to see The Flash, even though my journey in that universe hasn't been overwhelmingly positive. I think this is going to be good, which you said you'll see it too because of Michael Keaton's inclusion.
The best Batman.
Yeah. Aquaman 2 was the one where I was like, is this even a real trailer? But it doesn't really matter because I'm not all that keen to see Aquaman 2, as you heard from my glowing review of Aquaman 1. So, yeah, I thought it was a light-on week for new trailers, but hopefully next week we'll be able to come in with some pretty exciting things that we are anticipating.
Very good.
We'll probably wrap things up there, guys. I do want to just remind you again to like and subscribe and share all these videos around. That very much helps us. But as I said before, more than anything, the thing we're looking for is comments, because that will give us indications of things you want to see in future podcasts. But also, we'd love to hear your film suggestions. So a reminder, they do need to be G or PG while we are going through the term, because we are watching them with a variety of different year levels at school. But if they fit into that parameter, we are very, very excited to chat about them, hoping to get some films that we haven't seen before in future weeks.
What I want to leave on is this little anecdote where on the set of the film, Bob Hoskins, just to bring up like levity and like try and make things a bit more fun, would go around singing Lionel Richie's Hello, but he would say, "Hello, is it Smee you're looking for?"
Just perfect.
And on that note, bye-bye, people.
Thanks very much, guys. Have a good one.